The wind off the lake cut through the seams of my coat, sharper than memory. I stood for a long moment outside the Lincoln Memorial Veterans Pavilion, one hand clutching the strap of my old duffel, the other curled stiffly around a folded flag. Across the plaza, a crowd had already gathered. Camera crews, local dignitaries, young soldiers in ceremonial blues, all of them clean-cut and purposeful, moving with that particular rhythm you forget when the uniform no longer fits. I approached slowly. My boots, worn smooth by years, scuffed against the polished stone steps. A man with a clipboard nodded as I neared, then shifted his stance. Another turned his shoulder to block me, speaking into a mic clipped beneath his collar. A third stepped forward, taller, younger, buzz-cut, mouth already tightening. "Sorry, sir," he said. "You'll need to move along." I paused. "I'm here for the Veterans Day event." He looked me over once. "Quick, that's all it took." "This isn't for drifters pretending to be soldiers," he said, louder this time. The words didn't sting. Not exactly. But they echoed. Around us, conversation quieted. A few heads turned. One or two chuckled low. I heard a phone camera click. A woman near the back held up her hand to her mouth, not in protest, but to hide her amusement. I didn't argue, just adjusted the weight of my duffel and turned back into the wind. The flag in my hand, creased, tightly folded, shuddered slightly in the cold. I'd carried it for years, through shelters, Greyhound stations, long nights in unfamiliar cities. It wasn't from my own funeral detail. It belonged to my brother, Thomas. He was younger, quieter. Died in Laos in '67. I'd been with the retrieval team. I carried him out. That flag was the last thing I owned that proved he lived. The plaza receded behind me, awash in light and sound and speeches meant to honor people like me. But I wasn't part of their ceremony. I wasn't in their frame. I pulled my collar up, turned down the side street, and walked. Nobody followed. No one called out. The folded flag stayed pressed tight against my chest, closer than breath, older than shame. My name is Robert Lang. Most folks used to call me Bobby. These days, if anyone calls me anything at all, it's usually, sir, with a question mark behind it, or nothing at all. But the calendar keeps turning, and I still keep faith with certain dates. November 11th is one of them. This morning, I woke before the sun. Habit. Mostly. Old bones ache differently when it's cold, but I've never needed an alarm. I lit the stove burner in the kitchenette with a match I'd been saving, boiled water for instant coffee, and stood with one hand braced on the counter, watching the sky shift from black to slate through the small cracked window. The jacket was ready. I'd pressed it 2 nights ago with a steam kettle and the flat side of a saucepan. It's not dress regulation anymore. Buttons don't shine like they used to, but the embroidery is still there, faded above the breast pocket. Art Lang. The boots took longer. Years of wear had thinned the soles and cracked the heels, but I worked them with a toothbrush and old polish until they looked decent enough to carry me 1 more mile. I left the apartment with the flag tucked under one arm, the duffel over my shoulder. There wasn't much in it. An old photo of my brother and me in front of a sandbag bunker, a creased discharge paper that no one accepts as ID anymore, and a small tin of medals I never wear. The buses ran late. Veterans ride free if you show something, but the driver didn't ask for anything today. Just nodded, eyes tired, and let me pass. I took the number 14 west, then changed to the number 5 north. From the last stop, I walked 2.5 miles across broken sidewalks, past convenience stores with iron shutters and churches with hand-painted signs. As I walked, I thought about Korea. 52. Winter had been brutal that year, and we were dug in near a frozen river whose name I couldn't pronounce then and still can't now. I was 19, skinny, stubborn, too fast with my mouth. I carried a radio pack, humped gear for the older men until I proved I could hold my ground. One night, artillery landed closer than usual. One of ours misfired. A crater swallowed half our forward post. I dug out 2 men with my bare hands before the medics came. Didn't think twice. They gave me a letter of commendation. I never cashed the war bond it came with. 15 years later, I was in Laos. 67. Officially, we weren't there, but we were. Recon. Mostly quiet extractions, sometimes not so quiet. That's where Thomas died. He was part of a comms relay team. Young, not built for field work. I begged him not to go forward that morning, told him to wait it out. He smiled, said, It's just static. I'll fix it. I heard the explosion before the radio cut. I was in the trees when I saw the smoke. It took me 40 minutes to reach the site. I pulled what I could from the wreckage. What was left of him, I carried home in silence. They folded the flag tight, handed it to me on the tarmac. I didn't cry. Not until I got back to the barracks and opened the duffel with his name on. He had a letter inside, addressed to me. Said, "If you're reading this, something went wrong. But I don't regret going, because I knew you'd carry me home." I've carried him ever since. Not in bitterness. In duty. That flag, that was his voice. That was his silence. I tried going back to regular life after discharge. Got work here and there. Warehouse jobs, night shifts, temp maintenance contracts. The joint started going in my 60s. Then the rent went up. Then the VA lost track of my file. Said my address wasn't valid. No permanent residence. No benefits. Funny how fast the system forgets you when your mailing address fades. I never drank much. Never had a family of my own. Just Thomas, and the boys we buried along the way. Each year, on this day, I polish the boots, press the jacket, and carry the flag to wherever the city holds its ceremony. Sometimes they let me in, sometimes they don't. But I show up, because remembering is a kind of survival. Because silence needs witnesses. Because that's what we were taught. Never leave anyone behind, even if it's you. I didn't go far after they turned me away. Just around the side of the pavilion, where a concrete bench faced nothing but frozen hedges. The duffel sat on my lap. I folded my hands over the flag to keep it from the wind. It was too cold to sit still, but I sat anyway. The boots I'd polished that morning had already begun to scuff again, white salt leaching into the cracks. Behind me, music started. Some brass arrangement of the national anthem played through a portable sound system. People clapped. A voice boomed out names of units and campaigns. Vietnam, Desert Storm, OEF, OIF. Applause followed each one. No mention of Korea. No mention of Laos. I didn't expect any. Then I heard her voice. "Hey, you alright?" I looked up slowly. She was in her 30s, maybe. Clean coat, scarf tucked under her collar. Phone raised just slightly in one hand. She didn't wait for my answer. "Are you a vet?" I nodded once. "Long time ago." She hesitated, then said, "Can I film this?" She gestured toward me, not exactly asking. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I understood. She pressed record anyway. Behind her, a couple of kids in hooded sweatshirts leaned against the wall. One of them laughed. "He's still got his gear bag and everything," the other said. "Bet he bought that coat at Goodwill." The woman said nothing. "Just film. Say your name for the camera," she prompted. "Robert Lang." "And you say you're a veteran?" I nodded again, slower this time. "Where'd you serve?" I glanced down at the flag, then up again. "Korea and Laos." She frowned slightly. "But you don't have ID or anything official?" "No, ma'am, just this." I held up the flag, not offering it, just showing. She turned off the camera. "You know, people fake this kind of thing. It's disgusting." Then she walked off, pulling her coat tighter. That night, I returned to my room just before the shelter closed its doors. The mat was the same one I'd slept on for 2 winters. Corner spot, close to the radiator. I unrolled the blanket someone had left folded atop the pile and laid my duffel underneath my knees so no one would try to take it. It was near midnight when the shouting started. Voices from 2 bunks down. Someone yelling about stolen shoes. A scuffle. The staff came through, broke it up. I stayed still. It was safer that way. The next morning, I left early, took the side alley to the corner diner and stood outside until one of the waitresses saw me and gave a nod. They knew me there. Didn't ask much. I was polite. I paid when I could. A booth had been left empty in the back. I sat, pulled the folded flag onto the table. Then I heard the voice again, different, but too familiar. "Look at this." The woman from the day before had posted the video online. The screen was small, but I could see my face. "Pale, wind chap." My words clipped together, edited maybe, or maybe just poorly remembered. The caption read, "Homeless man pretends to be veteran at Chicago Veterans Day event. How can he not be ashamed?" It was spreading fast. The video had hundreds of comments already. Some laughed, others scolded. "Get a job. Total fraud. Disgraceful. Wearing a uniform like that. Bet he found that flag in the trash." I sat still. The coffee cooled in front of me. At some point, I realized the waitress had stopped coming by. She glanced over but didn't refill my cup. Didn't ask if I needed anything else. I didn't blame her. Truth bends under the weight of proof. And I had none. No ID. No discharge certificate that any office would honor. Just a duffel with an old coat, a worn pair of boots, and a flag that had traveled more miles than most men walk in a lifetime. The waitress brought me a bill I hadn't asked for. I left exact change and walked out. Over 200 miles away, in a darkened corner of Fort Meade, Colonel Esther I sat alone with a second monitor glowing against the dim of her office. She was U.S. Army Intelligence Command, Senior Threat Analysis. Most nights she reviewed high-level chatter, misinformation patterns, digital intrusion probes. Tonight, she was reviewing flagged viral content from military-adjacent tags. She was 3 screens in when she saw it. The video, low resolution, crop, captioned with sarcasm. She clicked mute, played it again and again. Something caught. Not the voice, not the uniform, the face. She leaned in, paused the frame, zoomed slightly. The eyes, tired, set wide, a scar near the right brow. She didn't know the name, but she knew the expression. A kind of silence only carried by those who've walked into fire and never quite come back out. Colonel 1 opened a restricted terminal. She typed a series of clearance codes, accessed a Cold War archive not indexed for public viewing. She began with the name he'd said aloud, Robert Lang. Nothing recent, but something flickered near the bottom of the 1950s files. Master Sergeant Robert Lang, Field Rescue Operation Echo, 6, 1952, 6 lives saved, including Lieutenant Arthur Reed. She blinked, sat back in her chair. Then she pulled up another name. Lieutenant Arthur Reed, retired in the 1980s, died in 2004, survived by son, General Marcus Reed, current head of Joint Forces Command. She stared at the screen, then whispered, "You weren't pretending." Colonel 1 didn't waste time. By dawn, she had sent a secure message to Joint Forces Command, marked Priority Red. It included the Echo 6 file, the edited video, and a still frame of Robert Lang's face. She attached a note. "Sir, this man pulled your father from a live fire zone in 52. The record is sparse but real. The footage being circulated is false in spirit if not fact. Recommend immediate review and direct response." She signed it with her credentials and rang. Then she sat back in the empty silence of her office, letting the hum of the terminal remind her she hadn't imagined any of it. 2 hours later, the message reached General Marcus Reed. He didn't speak at first, just stared at the screen, his fingers pressed lightly to his lips. He replayed the video of Lang at the memorial, the one now burned into 1,000 timelines and shared in chat threads full of contempt. Then he opened the file. He read the name, Master Sergeant Robert Lang. Read the location, Echo 6 Rescue Sector. Read the names of the men he saved, including 2nd Lieutenant Arthur Reed, his father. The general pushed back from the desk slowly. Aides hovered outside his office but didn't speak. He stepped out without a word, passed through security with no delay, and entered the strategic archive room alone. He laid the file in front of a secure scanner and pulled up the cross-referenced logs. Medical evac reports, unit rosters, old satellite intercepts logged on microfilm. It was all there. Robert Lang had carried his father from the blast radius of a failed night raid that had gone off script. When a fuel depot went up, Arthur Reed had been concussed and left behind in the chaos. Lang went back for him, under fire. They didn't even share a unit. He had just heard the call. The general touched the black and white photo embedded in the digital file. Lang and 2 others, standing knee-deep in brush, one of them bleeding, Lang gripping a rifle with one hand and holding a radio handset in the other. A note was scrawled beneath it, Lang, R. stayed behind for retrieval. Saved 6. Refused commendation. General Reed stepped back from the console. The noise outside the building continued, phones ringing, cars idling, the drone of military routine. But he heard none of it. He made one call to Colonel 1, and then another to Communications Command, and then the third to his driver. That same morning, in a dusty room above a corner market in South Chicago, I sat by the window. The flag was on the sill, catching sunlight. The jacket hung nearby, still pressed but cold. I had skipped breakfast. It wasn't about pride, I just wasn't hungry. The night before, someone had graffitied the shelter wall with the word "fake" in red mark. I didn't say anything. They'd cleaned it up before sunrise, but I'd seen it. I hadn't been outside long when I heard engines, a sound too organized to be regular traffic. Then came the slam of doors, the hush of footsteps. I stayed still, didn't flinch when someone knocked. "Mr. Lang?" a voice called. "Sir, it's General Marcus Reed." At first, I thought it was some cruel joke, a prank, another attempt to shame me. But then I heard it again. My name is Marcus Reed. I believe you served with my father. I opened the door. There he stood, full dress uniform, medals gleaming, shoulders squared like iron. Behind him stood aides, security, a camera crew held respectfully back. He didn't wait for me to speak. He saluted, and didn't lower his hand until I returned it. I'm here, he said, because my father told me about the man who saved him. He said, if you ever meet Bobby Lang, you thank him. That man didn't just save my life. He gave me a second chance to live it right. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. My father wrote this before he died. He hoped it would find you. I've been waiting for the moment to deliver it. He handed it to me gently. Inside was my name, in Arthur Reed's handwriting. I didn't open it. Not then. Reed continued, there's been an injustice. One I intend to correct. I looked down at the flag in my arms. What's left to correct? I asked. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he stepped back and gestured toward a black SUV. Its door opened. He didn't say, come. He said, let me take you where you belong. The streets were lined with morning commuters who stopped to stare as the motorcade passed. Not because of the general. Not even because of the flags on the cars. Because of me. Because the image of a so-called fraud had traveled faster than the truth. Now, the truth was answering. The gates of the Lincoln Pavilion opened wide when we arrived. No security guards stepped forward. No one blocked the way. The crowd was already forming. Journalists. Yes, but also civilians, uniformed men and women, even the woman who had filmed the original video, her hands shaking as she lowered her phone. General Reed stepped out first. Then he turned, extended his arm, and helped me out. We walked side by side. No one spoke. No one dared. At the front steps, where I'd once been turned away, Reed stopped. This man, he said, turning to the cameras, is Master Sergeant Robert Lang. He saved my father's life during a mission no one was allowed to speak of. He looked over the crowd. Today, we remember not only the battles fought, but the quiet sacrifices that history failed to write down. Mr. Lang is one of the many whose stories were buried, not out of shame, but out of silence. Then he stepped aside, and gestured for me to approach the podium. I didn't say much, just enough. I've carried a folded flag for 56 years. I told them. It belonged to my brother. He died serving a country that sometimes forgets, but never stops being worth the cost. I held up the flag, and I kept showing up, even when nobody saw me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. The kind of silence you earn. Inside the pavilion, they unveiled a new exhibit. It stood beside the Medal of Honor wall. A single case. My coat. The photograph of Thomas and me. The duffel bag. The flag. A plaque read, The Unseen. Heroes without headlines. Robert Lang, Master Sergeant, U.S. Army, Korea, Laos, Rescuer, Witness, Brother. After the ceremony, I didn't speak to the cameras. They shouted questions, their microphones pointed like weapons. How does it feel to finally be recognized? Do you forgive the people who turned you away? What do you want people to learn from your story? But I didn't answer. General Reed stood beside me, firm as a guard post. When someone asked him what justice looked like, he didn't quote a speech. He turned, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said, this man saved a life that made mine possible. That's the only record I need. It was more than words. He meant it. They escorted me to a private room inside the pavilion, away from the crowd. The space smelled of polished wood and floor wax, warm despite the stone. There was a table with water, a worn chair beside it. I sat, unwrapped the flag and laid it across my lap. A few moments later, Colonel 1 entered. She wasn't in dress uniform, just standard issue, sharp lines and clean edges. She stood across from me, hands behind her back. I should have found you sooner, she said. You did, I replied. Found me when it mattered. She nodded. Then she stepped forward and placed a thin folder on the table. We're restoring your service record, your commendations, your rank, everything. It's all being updated. I looked at the folder but didn't open it. After a pause, she added, you were owed a silver star for Echo 6. It was never filed properly. I didn't want it filed, I said. But now you'll receive it, she said gently. And Thomas? We're reopening his file too. His role was marked undesignated civilian contractor. That changes today. He'll be listed among the honored dead. I sat back, felt the weight in my chest shift, not lifted, just rearranged. Thank you, I said. She nodded again and left. Later, Reed returned. No aides this time, just him. He sat beside me, silent for a long stretch. Then he pulled out a small envelope, aged at the corners, sealed but fragile. My name was on the front, written in Arthur Reed's hand. I opened it. Inside was a single page. The ink had faded, but the words were steady. Bobby, if this finds you, it means I didn't. I don't know what happened after Korea, but I never forgot what you did for me. I had a son, named him Marcus. If he ever finds you, I hope he shakes your hand. I owe you my life. I owe you every Christmas morning with my family. Every breath I got to take after that night. With respect always. Arthur. I folded the letter. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. I didn't need to. Reed placed a small box on the table next. Inside, a new metal case. Silver star. Polished and set into dark velvet. Beneath it, a certificate, signed by the Secretary of Defense and Reed himself. Would you like to receive it formally? He asked. I shook my head. I've already got what matters. He smiled at that. Outside, the news had begun to shift. The video that once condemned me was now framed as a lesson. New headlines read, Veteran wrongfully dismissed honored by U.S. military. Hero without headlines. Robert Lang's silent service. Not all proof is paper. The story of one flag, one man, and one forgotten war. The woman who had filmed me issued an apology, public, tearful, contrite. I didn't hold anger. She wasn't the first to mistake wear for weakness. She wouldn't be the last. But the crowd had changed. People stepped forward now, not just to ask, but to thank. Not just to see, but to understand. A child handed me a drawing, crayons on paper, a flag, and a soldier with a wrinkled face. My dad says you're a real hero, he said. I patted the boy's shoulder, not for praise, for memory. That evening, the exhibit opened to the public. Inside, the jacket hung behind glass. The flag sat in its case, freshly folded. The photo of Thomas and me had been enlarged beside it. A small plaque explained the story, but the line that caught people, really stopped them, was at the bottom. Some heroes don't wear uniforms anymore. Some carry nothing but memory, but they still show up. I stood in the back as people walked through. Some bowed their heads. Some cried. Some just stared, quiet, reverent. General Reed stayed beside me the whole time. At one point, he turned to me and said, would you like to speak again? I said no, because I already had. By surviving, by remembering, by walking, year after year, until someone finally turned around. That was enough. The next morning, I rose before the sun again. Old habits. Only now, I wasn't in a shelter, or an alley, or a bench warmed by engine vents. I was in a guest room inside the historic wing of the Lincoln Pavilion, where visiting veterans sometimes stayed. It wasn't fancy. A single bed, a coat hook, a clock that ticked with a soft dignity, but it was warm, clean, silent. I took my time, dressed with care, pressed the collar of my shirt against the edge of the sink to flat, ran a comb through my hair, tied my boots slowly, looping the laces through the cracked eyelets as if they mattered, because they did. At 0700 sharp, there was a knock at the door. A soft, deliberate rhythm, military. I opened it to find a young specialist standing straight, his face neutral, eyes clear. Master Sergeant Lang, he said, saluting. We're ready when you are. He didn't ask. He honored. Outside, the pavilion was already stirring. A light snowfall had dusted the stone, settling in the seams like memory. The exhibit hall stood at the far end, glass gleaming in the early light. They had moved the mic again. This time, it stood not for politics or posturing, but for history, for restoration. I stepped toward it, flanked by soldiers. Real soldiers. Not just in uniform, but in heart. Some had come from nearby bases. Some had taken leave to attend. No orders, just duty. The small crowd gathered with quiet anticipation. A few civilians. A few family members of those I'd once known. Faces I couldn't name, but whose eyes held something I recognized, reverence. General Reed stood near the front, still and solemn. A bugler played a slow version of Taps. Then silence followed, stretching across the plaza. I took the podium. The mic caught a little wind, and I waited for it to settle. Then I began. I don't speak for all veterans, I said. I barely speak for myself most days. But I want to say this, for the ones who never made it home. For the ones who did, but were never seen again. And for the ones who keep showing up, even when they're invisible. I glanced toward the exhibit hall. You don't carry a country on your back for praise. You carry it because someone has to. And if they forget you after, you carry it anyway. I unfolded a copy of Thomas's last letter. Read one line. I knew you'd carry me home. I folded it again, pressed it to my chest. I still am. Then I stepped back. No applause. Just silence. The kind that listens. After the ceremony, people filed into the hall, quiet and steady. No pushing, no flash photography, just footfalls and breath. The exhibit was simple. My coat, the photo, the folded flag. But now, there was something else too. A list of names, added overnight. Other soldiers from Echo 6. Others who had never been recognized because their service was classified, erased, sealed. The final panel read, "This space is for all those who served without spotlight, whose only record is memory, whose only ceremony is justice, long delayed." I stood near the back wall, unnoticed by most, and watched as families paused, read, lingered. A boy no older than 10 stood before the flag. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder. He asked, "Did this man fight in a war?" She said, "He saved people in one." He nodded, solemn, the way children do when they understand without fully knowing why. That afternoon, a woman approached me as I sat beneath the rotunda, resting my legs. She carried a clipboard and wore the crest of a veterans advocacy group. "We'd like to invite you to speak to younger veterans," she said. "Help them feel seen. Help them carry forward." I considered it, nodded once. "If they'll listen to an old man with old stories, I'll come." She smiled. "They will." Later, in the apartment they offered me, modest, subsidized, clean, I unpacked the duffel for the first time in years. Not just to use, but to settle. The coat went into the closet, the photo onto the windowsill, the letter, Arthur's, into the drawer of the nightstand. But the flag stayed where it always did, right next to the bed. Because some symbols don't retire, they just rest. That evening, as snow began to fall again outside the window, I sat in the quiet and wrote a new letter. To no one, to everyone. You may be forgotten for a while, but truth waits. You may be unseen for a time, but someone is always watching. Show up, even when no one sees you, even when they doubt you, especially then. Then I signed it. Robert Lang, U.S. Army. Brother. Witness. Still standing. Honor doesn't come on demand. It isn't something handed out because of age or scars or the noise someone makes when trying to be seen. It arrives slower, quieter, sometimes not at all. But when it does come, when truth finally finds its way past folded paperwork and turned backs and the brittle indifference of time, it arrives like a saluting hand, still and unshaking. That's what I remember now. Not the words that were said when they doubted me, not the names they called me in passing, but the silence that followed when they finally listened. I think of Thomas, of the cold in Laos, of the heat in Korea, of the men who died not because they failed, but because they weren't seen in time. And I think about standing on those pavilion steps, a folded flag against my chest, surrounded not by shame, but by understanding. Real honor isn't in medals. It's in memory that refuses to die. It's in the quiet acts, showing up when it hurts, when no one sees, when everyone's forgotten you. And it's in the eyes of a general who says, without needing to raise his voice, "That man saved my father." So I keep walking. I still shine my boots on November 11th, still press my jacket, still carry the flag, because there's always someone watching, even when you can't see them. And sometimes, justice doesn't speak loudly. It just arrives, on quiet steps, under a heavy sky, with its hand raised in salute.